On March 11, 1983, at 9:47 p.m., a pizza delivery man in Alexandria, Virginia, noticed something impossible. The same apartment had ordered pizza 4 Fridays in a row, but the boxes he delivered were never opened. The apartment was on the 4th floor of a modest residential complex just 4.2 miles from the CIA in Langley, in an area where federal analysts, defense contractors, and Pentagon employees lived in identical red brick buildings. Hundreds of pizzas were delivered there every week. But what was happening in apartment 4C, hidden behind regular orders and generous tips, was a communication system that should not have existed on American soil, and it was discovered not by sophisticated electronic surveillance or counterintelligence infiltration, but by a 22-year-old college student who noticed that some people weren't ordering pizza for the food. Inspired by CIA and FBI files declassified after the end of the Cold War, this dramatization explores how the KGB operated secret cells in American suburbs, where safe houses were maintained under false identities, and where a forgotten receipt would lead to the largest dismantling of a Soviet spy network in the 1980s. On the night of March 11, 1983, something began to unfold in an apartment complex in Alexandria that would expose a KGB operation that had been running continuously for at least 3 years. The Riverside Gardens complex spanned 2 blocks along Seminary Road, consisting of 6 4-story apartment buildings constructed in the early 1970s. The location was strategic. It was a 15-minute drive from the Pentagon, 20 minutes from CIA headquarters, and surrounded by other residential complexes that housed thousands of federal government employees. Marco's Pizza had opened a store 3 blocks away in January 1982 and quickly became the favorite delivery spot for area residents. The store processed an average of 180 orders per night on weekdays and 250 on weekends. Christopher James Riley was 22 years old and had been working as a delivery driver since September 1982 while attending his 3rd year of economics at George Washington University. His responsibilities included picking up orders from the kitchen, checking addresses, driving his 1978 Honda Civic to locations, delivering pizzas and processing payments. The job paid $4.50 an hour plus tips, which usually totaled $60 to $80 per 6-hour shift. Chris worked Tuesday through Saturday from 5 p.m. to 11 p.m. and had become familiar with the regular customers. He recognized apartments by their order preferences, tipping patterns, and little quirks. There was the family in Building 3 who always ordered an extra-large pepperoni pizza on Wednesdays. The elderly couple in Building 5 who ordered a small vegetarian pizza every Sunday. The group of students in Building 2 who never tipped, but always paid with meticulously counted coins. And then there was Apartment 4C in Building 1, the anomaly. Chris delivered his first pizza to Apartment 4C on February 18, 1983, a Friday at 9:52 p.m. The order was straightforward. A large cheese pizza, no toppings, $8.95 plus delivery. He climbed the stairs to the 4th floor, found the apartment, and knocked on the door. He waited approximately 15 seconds, then the door opened about an inch, just enough for a hand to appear holding a $20 bill. "Large cheese pizza," Chris said, holding out the hot box. The hand took the box. "Thanks. Keep the change." The door closed before Chris could see who was on the other side. The voice was male with no obvious accent, and the tip, over $11, was unusually generous. Chris walked down the stairs, thinking he had just met someone extremely reserved or simply in a hurry. Riverside Gardens had all kinds of residents. It wasn't strange. The following Friday, February 25th at 9:49 p.m., another order came in from Apartment 4C. Large cheese pizza, exactly the same order. Chris made the delivery. He went up to the 4th floor, knocked on the door. He waited 15 seconds. The door opened 20 centimeters. A hand appeared with a $20 bill. "Large cheese pizza." The hand took the box. "Thanks. Keep the change." The door closed. Chris stood in the hallway for a moment, processing. Same order, same time, same exact tip, same minimal door opening. But still, it wasn't necessarily suspicious. People developed routines. Maybe it was someone with social anxiety. Maybe someone working from home who didn't want interaction. On March 4th at 9:51 p.m., it happened again. Apartment 4C, large cheese pizza, $20. "Keep the change." This time, as Chris was walking down the stairs, he paused on the third floor and looked up through the stairwell. Apartment 4C was at the end of the hallway, the last door on the left. There was a light on inside, visible through the bottom crack of the door. And then Chris heard something. Voices. Multiple voices coming from inside the apartment, speaking in low volume but clearly audible through the thin walls of the building. He couldn't make out words, but there were at least 2 people inside. This made him pause. If there were multiple people in the apartment, why was it always just a cheese pizza? Why never a larger order? Why never any variation? On March 11th, when the order from apartment 4C appeared again at 9:47 p.m., large cheese pizza, Chris decided to pay closer attention. He prepared the delivery as usual, drove to Riverside Gardens and went up to the 4th floor. But this time, before knocking on the door, he paused and observed. The door to apartment 4C was identical to the others. No decorations, no welcome mat, no personalized apartment numbers, completely anonymous. He knocked. He waited. The door opened 20 centimeters. A hand appeared with $20. Large cheese pizza. But this time, the moment the hand took the box, Chris deliberately leaned slightly to the side, trying to see through the opening. The door closed instantly, faster than the other times, as if the person on the other side had noticed Chris's movement and reacted. Chris stood there for a moment, his heart racing without knowing exactly why. Then he went downstairs, back to his car, and sat for several minutes before starting the engine. Something was wrong. Not drastically wrong. Not obviously criminal, but wrong in a way he couldn't articulate. That night, after his shift ended at 11 p.m., Chris mentioned apartment 4C to the manager of Marco's Pizza, a 40-year-old man named Frank Delgado, who had run the store since it opened. "Have you ever noticed anything strange about apartment 4C at Riverside Gardens?" Chris asked, as he cleaned his work area. Frank looked up from where he was counting the day's cash. 4C? I can't think of anything specific. Why? They order every Friday, same time. Always cheese pizza. They never open the door more than a few inches. And they pay with a $20 bill, always tell me to keep the change. Frank shrugged. Good tip. Regular customer. Sounds like the kind of customer we want. But the pizza, Chris said, hesitating. I don't think they're eating it. How do you know? Just a feeling. The apartment doesn't smell like pizza. There aren't any old boxes piled up in the hallway trash can like in the other apartments. And there are multiple people inside, but always just one small pizza. Frank closed the cash register and looked at Chris with an expression that was half amused, half skeptical. Chris, you're overthinking this. Maybe they eat the pizza later. Maybe they put it in the fridge. Maybe they feed a dog. Who knows? It's not our responsibility. Chris nodded, feeling slightly ridiculous. Frank was probably right. He was overthinking it. But as the weeks passed and the pattern continued, March 18th, March 25th, April 1st, every Friday, always 9:45 to 9:50 p.m., always cheese pizza, always 20. Chris couldn't shake the feeling that apartment 4C wasn't ordering pizza to eat. It was using pizza for something else entirely. On April 8, 1983, Chris made a decision. He would begin documenting the deliveries to apartment 4C, not for any specific reason he could articulate, but because his instinct, the same instinct that had helped him get high marks in courses on economic analysis and pattern recognition, told him there was meaning there. He bought a small spiral notebook that fit in the pocket of his delivery jacket and began recording details. April 8, 1983, 9:48 p.m., apartment 4C large cheese pizza, $20, tip of $11. So 5 door opened, 20 simultaneous male voice, no accent. Door closed in 3 seconds. Over the next 4 weeks, Chris expanded his observations. He began arriving early on Fridays, parking his car where he had a view of Building 1. He observed traffic patterns, noted who came and went, and paid attention to vehicles parked in the same spot repeatedly. On April 15th, he noticed that a dark blue Chevrolet sedan was parked in front of Building 1 every Friday he worked, always in the same spot, always arriving around 8:30 p.m. and leaving around 11 p.m. On April 22nd, he noticed that the lights in apartment 4C were on before he made his delivery, but they often went out within 10 to 15 minutes after he left. On April 29th, something different happened. When Chris knocked on the door at 9:46 p.m., it opened as usual. The hand appeared with $20. But this time, When Chris handed over the pizza, the box slipped slightly in the transition and he instinctively held it steady. For a split second, his hand touched the hand of the person on the other side, and he felt something that made him freeze. The hand was cold. Not just room temperature cold, but cold in a way that suggested the person was nervous, adrenaline pumping, blood vessels constricted. "Sorry," Chris said reflexively. "No problem," the voice replied, and the door closed. But Chris stood in the hallway processing. Why would someone be nervous about receiving a pizza, unless it wasn't about the pizza? On May 6th, Chris decided to run a test. When the order for apartment 4C arrived at 9:49 p.m., he went up as usual. But this time, after knocking and delivering the pizza, he deliberately dropped his keyring on the hallway floor as he turned to leave. "Oh, sorry," he muttered, bending down to pick it up. And in that moment, with his lower position, he was able to see through the bottom crack of the door before it closed completely. He saw feet, multiple pairs. At least 3 people were standing immediately behind the door, all wearing dress shoes. Not sneakers, not slippers, polished black leather shoes, as if they were dressed for a business meeting. At 9:50 p.m. on a Friday night, in an apartment that ordered pizza every week. Chris returned to his car, heart racing, and wrote everything down in his notebook. On May 20th, he made a mistake that would change everything. When he made the delivery at 9:47 p.m., he forgot the receipt in his jacket pocket, instead of leaving it with the pizza, as was standard procedure at Marco's Pizza. The receipts had order details, time, and payment information. He didn't notice until he was back at the store at 10:30 p.m., and when he checked his pocket, the receipt was gone. It must have fallen out somewhere during subsequent deliveries. He didn't think about it again until Monday, May 23rd, when Frank Delgado called him into the back office of the pizzeria. "Chris, did you lose a receipt on Friday?" Yeah, for apartment 4C. "Why?" Frank held up a piece of paper. It wasn't the receipt. It was a photocopy of a receipt, apparently made on a high-quality commercial photocopier, every detail perfectly preserved. "This was left in our mailbox this morning," Frank said. "No envelope, no note, just this." Chris took the photocopy and studied it. It was definitely the receipt he had lost. Apartment 4C, large cheese pizza, $8.95, date and time stamped. "Why would someone photocopy a receipt and return it?" Chris asked. Frank shook his head. "I have no idea, but it's weird, right? How did they know it was our receipt? How did they know where to return it?" Chris felt something cold run down his spine. Someone had found the receipt he had lost, recognized it as belonging to Marco's Pizza, made a photocopy of it for some reason, and then intentionally returned the copy. Not the original. A copy. As if they wanted to keep the original, but let Marco's Pizza know they had it. "Frank," Chris said slowly, "I think something strange is going on in apartment 4C. That night, after hours of internal debate, Chris called the Alexandria police non-emergency line and asked to speak to someone about suspicious activity. He was transferred 3 times before reaching a detective named Raymond Walsh, who had worked in the investigations division for 12 years. Chris explained everything: the repeated deliveries, the strange behavior, the multiple occupants, the photocopy of the receipt. Walsh listened patiently, asked a few questions, and then said something Chris didn't expect. "Did you describe the car you see parked there?" "Dark blue Chevrolet sedan. Older model, maybe late 70s. There was a long pause. Then Walsh said, "Can you come to the station tomorrow? I want you to look at some photographs." On Tuesday, May 24th, 1983, at 2 p.m., Chris met with Detective Walsh at the Alexandria police station. Walsh led him into a conference room where a second person was waiting, a woman in her late 30s wearing a business suit. "Chris, this is Special Agent Margaret Feldman from the FBI," Walsh said. "When you mentioned the dark blue sedan and the pattern of behavior, I called Federal Counterintelligence. They're interested in what you observed." Agent Feldman sat across the table from Chris and opened a folder containing black and white surveillance photographs. She turned the first photo toward him. "Do you recognize this vehicle?" Chris looked. It was a dark blue Chevrolet sedan, photographed from a side angle. Visible license plate, VRN 9254. "That looks like the car I see," Chris said. "But I can't be absolutely sure." Feldman turned over another photo. This one showed a man of about 50 with gray hair getting out of the same blue sedan. "Have you seen this person before?" "Never," Chris said. The door to 4C never opens wide enough for me to see who's inside. Feldman closed the folder and leaned back. Chris, apartment 4C is rented under the name Robert J. Patterson. There is no Robert J. Patterson registered to pay taxes in Virginia. There is no employment history. There are no driver's license records. The identity is fake. Chris felt his stomach tighten. The vehicle you've been seeing, Feldman continued, is registered to a consulting firm called Eastern Analytics Group. Investigation has revealed that Eastern Analytics has no physical business presence, no publicly listed employees, and was incorporated using documents that are suspected to be fraudulent. She paused, letting that sink in. We've been watching this apartment intermittently since January, as part of a larger investigation into possible foreign intelligence activity in the D.C. area. But we didn't have sufficient grounds for a search warrant. What you've given us, the behavioral pattern, the return of the photocopied receipt, suggests sophisticated counter-surveillance and operational awareness. Chris processed this slowly. You're saying that apartment 4C is... What? Spies? We believe it may be a safe house, Feldman said, a location used by foreign intelligence agents for meetings, transfers of material, or as a communication point. The regular pizza deliveries may serve as cover. Normal activity in an apartment that might otherwise appear unoccupied or suspicious to neighbors. Walsh leaned forward. Chris, are you willing to continue making deliveries as before? Don't change anything, but let us know every time apartment 4C orders. That will give us an opportunity to set up surveillance. Chris nodded, though he felt the weight of the situation for the first time. He was no longer just delivering pizza. He was now part of a counterintelligence operation. On May 27, 1983, a coordinated surveillance operation was established around Riverside Gardens. Agent Feldman led a team of 6 FBI special agents, working in coordination with Detective Walsh and the Alexandria police. The plan was simple. When apartment 4C placed an order, Chris would immediately call a pager number that Feldman had provided. Agents would position themselves around the apartment complex before Chris made the delivery, and observe everyone entering or leaving the building during a 2-hour window around the delivery time. On Friday, June 3rd, at 9:46 p.m., the order came in. Large cheese pizza. Chris activated the pager. 20 minutes later, when he arrived at Riverside Gardens, 4 unmarked FBI vehicles were positioned at strategic locations. One on Seminary Road with a view of the front entrance, one in the parking lot behind Building 1, one parked in front of a laundromat across the street, and one on a side street with a view of the rear exits. Chris made the delivery as usual. He went up to the 4th floor, knocked, delivered the pizza, and received $20. The door closed. But this time, FBI agents were recording everything from multiple angles. Video surveillance captured the blue Chevrolet sedan arriving at 8:34 p.m. and parking. A man in his 50s, the same one in the photographs, got out and entered Building 1. Another man, younger perhaps in his late 30s, arrived 12 minutes later in a brown Ford Taurus and also entered. A middle-aged woman arrived at 9:12 p.m., driving a grey Toyota Camry, and went up to the building. All 3 vehicles were photographed, license plates recorded, and drivers captured on high-resolution surveillance video. Approximately 35 minutes after Chris's pizza delivery, the 3 individuals left separately, at intervals of 5 to 8 minutes. Each drove in a different direction. Mobile surveillance teams followed each vehicle. The oldest man, later identified as Gregory Paul Richmond, 52, drove to a residential address in McLean. Background checks revealed that Richmond worked as a consultant for a technology consulting firm that had contracts with the Department of Defense. The younger man, James Whitfield, 38, drove to Arlington and entered an apartment complex near Arlington National Cemetery. Further investigation revealed that Whitfield claimed to work as a financial analyst for an investment firm in D.C. The woman, Helena Novak, 47, drove to Georgetown and entered a townhouse. She was registered as a freelance translator, specializing in Slavic languages. Over the next 6 weeks, surveillance was maintained on all 4 locations, apartment 4C, and the residences of the 3 identified individuals. License plate analysis showed that all 3 vehicles had been registered using variations of corporate documents from companies that existed only on paper. On June 17th, the FBI obtained a court order to install listening devices in apartment 4C, taking advantage of a moment when all known occupants were away. Agents entered, installed microphones in 3 rooms, and left within 14 minutes. The microphones picked up revealing conversations. On Friday, June 24th, approximately 45 minutes before the regular pizza delivery, the microphones captured 3 voices in the apartment speaking English but using phrases that suggested training in coded communication. One man: "Has the material been confirmed for transfer on Tuesday?" One woman: "Confirmed. The contact in the South office will provide the complete package." Second man: "What about the observer? Still no activity." First voice: "No indication of compromise. Proceed as planned." On July 1st, warrant-authorized postal surveillance at Apartment 4C revealed that multiple letters were being delivered, addressed to Robert J. Patterson, all coming from post office boxes in different cities: Baltimore, Philadelphia, Richmond, which subsequent investigation showed to be mail forwarding locations used to obscure true senders. Forensic analysis of intercepted correspondence revealed letters that were innocent on the surface: utility bills, advertising mail, but had microscopic markings and printing variations consistent with steganography techniques, where messages were hidden in seemingly mundane documents. On July 22nd, something critical was captured on tape. During a meeting in Apartment 4C, one of the male voices said in Russian, not realizing that the FBI microphone also recorded foreign languages, "Moskva confirms next operation for August." Moskva. Moscow. The recording was sent to linguistic experts at the FBI who confirmed the accent was that of a native Russian speaker, not a second language speaker. Agent Feldman gathered his team on July 25th and presented the assessment. Apartment 4C was almost certainly a KGB safe house. The individuals using it were likely sleeper agents or handlers operating under false identities. The regular Friday meetings served as briefing sessions or information transfer points. The decision was made. Simultaneous arrests would take place at the next confirmed meeting in Apartment 4C. Target date: Friday, August 5th, 1983. On the morning of August 5th, 1983, 20 FBI agents gathered at an unmarked warehouse 1.5 miles from Riverside Gardens for the final operational briefing. Agent Feldman presented the execution plan. At 9:30 p.m., as soon as the pizza order was confirmed from Apartment 4C, Chris would make the delivery as usual. But this time, agents would be positioned inside the building, on the 2nd and 3rd floors, ready to go up to the 4th floor the moment the door to 4C was opened for the pizza delivery. The timing was critical. The door to 4C needed to be open, giving the agents an opportunity to enter before it could be locked or reinforced. Any evidence inside the apartment needed to be captured before it could be destroyed. Additional teams would be stationed in vehicles around the complex, ready to intercept anyone who tried to flee. By 8 p.m., all agents were in position. 2 agents posed as residents on the 2nd floor, pretending to chat in the hallway. 3 agents were on the 3rd floor, hidden on the staircase. 4 crash vehicles were strategically parked around the complex. At 9:44 p.m., the order came in to Marco's Pizza, large cheese pizza, Apartment 4C. Chris called the pager, prepared the pizza, and drove to Riverside Gardens as he had done dozens of times before, but this time feeling adrenaline rush through his veins. He parked, climbed the stairs to the 4th floor, pizza box in hand. His breathing was shallow, sweat on his palms. Agents on the 3rd floor, listening via radio, stood ready. Chris knocked on the door of 4C. Silence for 3 seconds. Then footsteps approaching. The doorknob turned. The door began to open just the usual 20 centimeters. A hand appeared with a $20 bill, and at that exact moment, 4 FBI agents burst out of the stairwell, covered the 8 meters of the hallway in seconds, and forced the door open with a coordinated impact. "FBI, hands on your head now." Chris threw himself against the opposite wall of the hallway, his heart pounding, pizza falling to the floor, as agents stormed the apartment with drawn weapons. Inside Apartment 4C, 3 people were present: Gregory Richmond, Helena Novak, and a 3rd man who had not been identified in previous surveillance. A table in the center of the living room was covered with documents, photographs, and what appeared to be miniature photographic equipment. Ground, hands behind your head!" The 3 occupants complied, although Richmond initially began to move toward the table before an agent blocked him. In less than 60 seconds, all 3 were handcuffed and removed from the apartment. FBI forensic teams immediately entered to document and process the scene. What they found confirmed the operation as a high-priority KGB safe house. 47 photographed documents related to NATO defense capabilities, a Minox camera with 7 rolls of undeveloped film radio transmission equipment tuned to frequencies used by Soviet intelligence services, $73,000 in US. Cash hidden inside a sofa. 3 Canadian passports with photographs of the occupants but different names, a notebook containing codes and meeting schedules that corresponded to Fridays when pizza was ordered, encryption material including single-use pads for coded communication. Simultaneously, teams executed search warrants at the residences of Richmond, Novak, and Whitfield, who was not in apartment 4C that night, but was arrested at his home in Arlington. At Richmond's home in McLean, agents found classified documents marked top secret stolen from defense contractors, a second microfilm camera, handwritten instructions in Russian on document photography techniques. At Whitfield's apartment, agents found radio equipment identical to that found in apartment 4C, $34,000 in cash documents showing multiple false identities. At Novak's townhouse in Georgetown, agents found translation material, including US military documents translated into Russian correspondence with addresses in Moscow, photographs of her, with individuals later identified as KGB officers. The third man in the apartment, identified as Viktor Andreev, 44, initially refused to speak, but fingerprint analysis revealed that he had entered the US under multiple different names via Canada. All 4 were transported to separate FBI facilities for questioning. Over the next 72 hours, the 4 arrested individuals were interrogated extensively. Helena Novak was the first to begin cooperating. She admitted that she had been recruited by the KGB in 1976 while working as a translator for the State Department. A Soviet intelligence officer operating under diplomatic cover at the Soviet embassy in Washington had approached her, initially asking for simple translations and gradually escalating to requests for access to classified documents. In 1979, she had been transferred to sleeper operation, receiving regular payment in exchange for providing translation and logistical support to other KGB agents operating in the DC area. Apartment 4C had been established in January 1980 as a safe meeting place. Rented under the false identity Robert J. Patterson, using forged documents, the apartment served as a place where agents could meet without risk of surveillance at embassies or public places. The regular pizza deliveries, Novak explained, were implemented in September 1982 as operational cover. Neighbors in apartment complexes notice apartments that appear occupied but never have visitors, never have deliveries, never have activity. But an apartment that orders pizza regularly seems normal, inhabited, innocent. "We never ate the pizza," Novak said during recorded questioning. "We threw it away after the meetings were over. It was just theater, to make the apartment look like any other." Gregory Richmond confessed that he had been passing classified information to the KGB since 1978. Through his work as a consultant for defense contractors, he had access to technical specifications for weapons systems, reconnaissance satellite capabilities, and NATO defense vulnerability assessments. He photographed documents using miniature cameras provided by the KGB, developed the film in his basement, and passed photographs to handlers during meetings in apartment 4C. His motivation, he claimed, was ideological. He believed that the balance of power between the US and the Soviet Union needed to be maintained through information parity, and that providing technical information to the Soviet side served the cause of peace by preventing an overwhelming American advantage. Prosecutors countered that he had been paid approximately $240,000 during his 5 years of espionage, suggesting that financial motivation was at least as significant as ideology. James Whitfield initially refused to cooperate, but evidence found at his residence, including Russian communication manuals and transmission equipment, established his role as a communications operator for the network, responsible for transmitting information back to Moscow via encrypted radio channels. Viktor Andreev never cooperated. He remained silent during all interrogations, invoked constitutional rights, and refused to acknowledge any questions. Subsequent analysis of his fingerprints and travel records suggested that he was an active-duty KGB officer, likely a senior handler, overseeing multiple operations on the East Coast. All four were formally charged with multiple counts of espionage under the Espionage Act. Trials took place between November 1983 and March 1984. Helena Novak negotiated a plea bargain and was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. She served 8 years before being released on parole in 1992. Gregory Richmond went to trial, was found guilty, and sentenced to 40 years in federal prison. He served 31 years before dying in prison in 2015. James Whitfield also went to trial, was found guilty, and sentenced to 25 years. He was released on parole in 2006 after serving 22 years. Viktor Andreev was found guilty after trial and sentenced to life in prison without parole. In 1986, he was included in a prisoner exchange negotiated between the US and the Soviet Union, returning to Moscow in exchange for imprisoned American agents. He never faced additional charges in the USSR. Counterintelligence analysis conducted by the FBI and CIA after the arrests revealed that the network operating through Apartment 4C had been active for at least 5 years and had compromised information, including technical specifications for Patriot missile systems, intelligence assessments of Soviet military capabilities, information on NATO force dispositions in Europe, data on missile defense programs. Estimates suggested that the information passed through this network had provided the Soviet Union with significant strategic advantages during arms control negotiations and had potentially compromised American defense capabilities. Christopher Riley continued to work at Marco's Pizza until he graduated in May 1984. He never spoke publicly about his role in the case until an interview in 2013, 30 years after the events. "I was just a college kid delivering pizza to pay the rent," he said. "I noticed something strange and couldn't ignore it. I don't feel like a hero. I was just paying attention. But I learned that sometimes espionage doesn't happen in dramatic places. It happens in ordinary suburban apartments, and sometimes it gets interrupted because someone notices that no one is eating the pizza." Apartment 4C remained vacant for 2 years after the arrests before being rented again to legitimate residents. Riverside Gardens continues to operate today, now under different management. Marco's Pizza closed that location in 1998, but the chain has expanded throughout the DC metro area, and the photocopied receipt that had triggered Chris's suspicion was never fully explained. Investigators believe it was returned by a member of the network as a psychological test to determine whether Marco's Pizza, or the delivery person, would react in a way that suggested counterintelligence surveillance. Ironically, it was precisely that action that had confirmed to Chris that something was very wrong. The story of Apartment 4C illustrates how intelligence operations during the Cold War often relied on simple camouflage, making the extraordinary seem completely ordinary. A KGB safe house hidden in suburban apartments, weekly meetings disguised as regular pizza deliveries, and for 5 years it worked perfectly, until a pizza delivery guy noticed that no one was eating. If you found this story fascinating, you need to hear about how a hotel maid found microfilm left behind by a CIA agent, forgotten inside a Bible in a hotel room in Vienna, how that single mistake led to an international manhunt, a prisoner swap, and revelations about how American agents operated behind the Iron Curtain during the most tense years of the Cold War.